I think we can begin today's celebration. So, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, 30 years, it's been quite a journey for SEI, for Estonia as well, and for Europe as a whole. When SEI Tallinn was established in 1992, Eastern Europe and the Baltic states, stood on the brink of a new dawn out of the ashes of the collapsed Soviet Empire. And there's been decades of progress, of innovation, of better lives here, and solving many environmental problems. I'd like to especially mention the creation of SEI Tallinn. Our previous deputy director at SEI, Lars Kristoffersson, at the time was instrumental and working together with not least Linnar Vik, who is here today, in creating SEI Tallinn. And Linnar is now esteemed member of our board of SEI Tallinn as well. Lars sends his congratulations today from Stockholm. My first visit to SEI and Estonia was in '97, I think, and I sensed it was still kind of in emerging economy mode then, this country. SEI Tallinn colleagues knew Russian, but many not so much English. But then things happened quickly, and it's been a real transformative change, which is very inspiring to look at. Today, Estonia is a front-runner in digital technology, and a full member, I would say, of Western liberal democracy, of the European Union, NATO, and the European Monetary Union. And our two countries are hand in hand in global leaders in digital. Sweden is also doing okay, actually, in this field. And sustainable innovation, it is tech companies, it's electric transport, smart city solutions, for example. But more than that, I think Sweden and Estonia are brothers, sisters, truly, tied together by history, culture, and the future aspirations we have for a sustainable, prosperous future for all, which happens to be SEI's vision statement as well. And throughout these 30 years, I had the privilege to be part of roughly 25. Also, SEI Tallinn has been an essential voice and knowledge provider, building the Baltic and Eastern European capacities, agenda setting, and actually being quite involved also, much more so than we usually can be in Sweden, involved in the policymaking process directly, supporting legislative work and policy decisions. And I've had the pleasure of working with and alongside many people in SEI Tallinn and the programs on, for example, climate policy analysis, strategic environmental assessment. And I've always cherished my visits here. I'm privileged and happy to be still allowed to come back here for at least a couple of more years. In the last few years, I would also like to mention how SEI Tallinn has really stepped up its game and started to grow its portfolio and its staff, and also become a voice, not only here, but also in Brussels, and in projects that SEI globally carries out around the world. We have more and more involvement of colleagues from here. So we have a fantastic staff here, fantastic leadership, and a supervisory board, really solid ground to stand on for the future. And I look really much forward to the continuation of this and to ever closer ties between our two countries. So I'm proud and happy for SEI Tallinn, and I'm proud to bring my global board of directors to this town to celebrate the 30 years and visiting the center. So I will now hand over to the chairperson of the SEI Board of Directors, Isabella Lövin. Isabella.
Thank you so much, Måns, for introducing me. So, Excellencies, dear friends of SEI, first of all, warm congratulations to SEI Tallinn for your 30th anniversary. I'm really proud to be the chair of the board of SEI overall. And Quite recently, I became the chair only last year. But knowing about the history, I think it's always fascinating to look back. And Måns already mentioned 1991 was the fall of the Soviet Union. 92 was the birth of SEI Tallinn. But 1992 was also the year when the UN countries joined together in an international treaty, the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, as a framework for international cooperation to combat climate change by limiting average global temperature increases and the resulting climate change, and coping with the impacts that were by then already evident and inevitable. That was 30 years ago. Margaret Thatcher was really convinced that we needed a binding agreement. George W. Bush, you know, the senior Bush, he was really also convinced that climate change and the greenhouse effect could be combated through the White House effect. So, meaning using your political power to actually do the change. This was 30 years ago. And I don't think any of us have heard of any anniversary of the UNFCCC this year. There's not so much to be celebrating. As we're now preparing for the 27th Global UNFCCC Climate Conference to be held in Sharm el-Sheikh, we can note that more carbon dioxide have been emitted into the atmosphere after 1992 than the entire history before 1992. We have the highest levels of CO2 in the atmosphere in the last 800,000 years. And we're already seeing the extreme weather events that are the effects of this enormous change to our atmosphere. The drought and the extreme heat waves in Europe this summer, the glacier melting that is going on everywhere, the extreme floodings due to the extreme monsoons right now in Pakistan, the fires in Australia, in California. We might think that we're in the middle of a climate crisis, but we're not. We're just in the beginning. The effects of ocean acidification, biodiversity loss, sea level rise, melting permafrost, changed ocean currents, these have not yet been experienced. Some of it we know will happen because of the emissions we already emitted. Some we know can still be avoided with immediate reductions of emissions and recovery of our natural ecosystems, forests and oceans. We meet here in Tallinn very close to the horrors of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Europe is facing an energy crisis due to the fact that it has made itself dependent on Russian gas and oil without wanting to see the risks implied with that. Multiple crises are going on simultaneously. A climate crisis, a security crisis, and a crisis for democracy in many countries. In this context, it's clear that SEI Tallinn is uniquely positioned to be part of the solution, in fact, to all these crises. Working with governments and international organizations with the Baltic, Eastern, but surely very European perspective, SEI Tallinn can help us all move forward, giving the evidence and well-founded policy suggestions that shows the world that we can build resilience on climate, on security, on energy, and on democracy through sustainability and climate action. This is a perspective that I see growing in importance when some countries or actors might want to give up on sustainability in the face of the fossil energy extortion that we now see from the Russian side. But if it was true after the pandemic that we should build back better, it's even more true now. We need to build resilient societies, and SEI Tallinn will be an important source of knowledge and expertise in how we can bring about that change. I really look forward to today's discussions, and again, I want to congratulate SEI Tallinn, wishing it well over the next 30 years, but by then I hope we will have stopped negotiated on climate and taken real action. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Warm welcome and gigantic thank you to all for coming, but even more so for being a partner, being a colleague, being our friend over the years. Some partnerships and friendships have lasted quite a long time. Some are fresh ones. Some are about to start to blossom, I hope. What I wanted to do is also just take a journey, a little bit look back, because we have whole day looking forward on this day, and kind of tell two tales, of a global tale and a local one, and how these two stories have developed over the years in parallel, sometimes together, sometimes perhaps separated. So this is the CO2 concentration, ppm, in 1992, at the time of UNFCCC, at the time of founding SEI Tallinn. It was, mostly in public perception. It was vague, scary story. Somebody modeled something and said something might happen. And at the same time, in Estonia, it was not a kind of story of something might happen. It was a really difficult context. I was astonished just looking at the average monthly wages, below 50 euros back then, or the issue of energy supply problems that we are talking about. I think everywhere you go, this is number one topic. This was the reality back then as well. How do we ensure actually that district heating doesn't collapse? How do we ensure that there's a fuel at pump station? Things like that. In terms of the energy markets, and then in terms of environmental policy. Where do you start? How do you start if it's actually lacking legislative framework? Rebuilding all the legislative framework, starting from constitution and building sectoral frameworks around that. This was a huge challenge back then. And I mean, if you look at any number in terms of what was the pollution, what was the kind of legacy of heavy Soviet-time industries or military forces that only left in 1994, Estonia. I mean, these were very difficult times. I think there was quite a small number of people in Estonia thinking about this number. There were more people thinking about these numbers and trying to cope with that and build a new country. And this was also the role for SEI back then. Just out of thin air, try to create something, build capacities while building the capacities of partners. I mean, we did the kind of first climate studies, climate adaptation scenarios, possible energy sector trends, or for example, in 1997, study to determine future trends in environmental legislation, kind of helping to create a system for environmental impact assessment, all those things. And really interestingly, the just transition that we talk really a lot at the European level. In 1993, actually, we started a project on northeast of Estonia, which is the oil shale region. heavily concentrated, and still now, 30 years later, we are talking about the just transition. But this was the first kind of working with local stakeholders over many years, actually assessing what could be done. I was going through and fascinating kind of, we should diversify, invest in clean solutions, new jobs, and so on. You know. So it was really responding to the local setting as well. Obviously, we were trying to do also scientific work on a European level and so on, but it was very much also anchored towards supporting in our local context. So 376. The things that had been talked about, starting slowly, the numbers start to creep up. This is 2004, Estonia joining EU and NATO. So and obviously, we, along with passing these milestones, we had to respond as well. I mean, preparing for joining EU, doing the background assessments that supported understanding what will be required of a member state, future member states, and then, you know, once you're a member, you know, becoming active yourself as well. What is our agenda in Europe, or how do we implement different directives? All this we had to respond as well, kind of helping to create, you know, environmental management systems, import them to, or doing assessments on how to create actually the, you know, waste systems and packaging and kind of the first foundations of a future circular economy type of thinking. But these were all kind of gradual works, or doing the impact assessments on environmental taxes and so on. So this kind of throughout the time responding to the challenges. And from time to time there's a moments where you feel like, nice. I would say when I saw that tweet, this is the tweet by back then Prime Minister Jüri Ratas from October 2019, where Estonian government decided to support the climate neutrality goal that the European Commission had proposed, and Estonia was one of the few members not immediately say, yes, we support. They said, we want to assess whether it's feasible and, you know, solve our political dialogues. We did the study back then, and obviously we can't take credit for this. There was huge international expectations and pressures and so on, but I do believe and hope that we helped a little bit take away anxieties, because we calculated and showed with that study, you know, is it doable? Yes, it's doable. How much does it cost? We said roughly this much. Can we finance that? Yes, we can. So it was a good moment to see that, yes, that if you put kind of your best resources to the task, actually you can match quite important decisions. And indeed, I mean, sometimes in Estonia as well, we lose sight of how deep the transformation has been. That actually, you know, now we are one of the top ones in terms of renewable share of renewable energy in Europe, which wasn't the case, absolutely, 30 years ago. Or that, you know, the GDP per capita has gone from really low to you know, high levels already, very high levels, or that we are ranking third in e-government, or we are ranking actually third in PISA, the educational testing, and the best in EU, whole EU, only after China and Singapore. So it goes to show that a lot can be achieved. And this is, I think, for us, a key question that how can we use that transformational knowledge? How can we share it in the future in our countries, regions? Because many countries are facing very significant challenges. We, I think, in Europe are still at a very good position in terms of doing the energy transition, tackling the energy crisis compared to so many other regions and countries. But the issue is that also what is the focus of such transformations? Because historically, I would say Estonia was very much focused on building the economic growth, resilience, and getting to a certain welfare level. And only only in, I would say, last 5-10 years, we have started to talk more and more about really on a wider scale. Obviously, at the expert level, you always talked about climate and biodiversity and so on, but at a societal level, I think we are only now there that there's a widespread discussions. What is the good balance? What is the optimum? And at the same time, when Estonia went through that story, we reached to a level that last week it was published by, among others, also ex-SEI Director Johan Rockström, the new article saying that we are passing the tipping point where certain ecosystems are starting to collapse, and most probably we are very close to irreversible changes in certain areas. And that is because the global pace and extent of actions has not been sufficient. And here we are, starting from 355, reaching 419. So, yeah. And this number, it's also, what is important is that we wouldn't get the tunnel vision. It's not about this one number, but it's a good reminder how we might miss that we are slipping and falling behind. So it's a good number to remind us that actually there's a deadline. And this is a picture from this year where we presented. Some very good partners are here, and I thank everyone. We were working with an expert group advising our Prime Minister and Minister of Finance as well, who seem to be happy receiving our recommendations on how to do the green transition. And I have a sense that talking to the colleagues that actually things are starting to happen, that our advice was taken on board. But we brought out that it's not only about energy. You need a holistic plan covering all sectors, all the key aspects of green transition. And the key challenge for, I guess, many countries, how do we actually get to the point where the strategic plans and real life go hand in hand? Not that you have the best strategies, but the investments and activities don't fall in line. And also, I think everybody understands there's a sense of urgency because of energy crisis, but also the climate and biodiversity crisis. This is not going anywhere. So the most important is the sense of urgency. Start doing the low-hanging stuff, no-brainers. That was the main message. And figure out the rest later. And at the same time also kind of mainstreaming and putting this biodiversity climate needs together and using the circular principles also to reduce the vulnerability of resource dependence. And at the same time ensuring that it's also a fair, equitable transition. So a lot of challenges ahead, and hopefully by the end of today, we will have the solutions to all of those. And we can go home and celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lauri. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Robert Watt. I'm SEI's Communications Director, and I'm going to be moderating today's panel discussions. But before we get there, I'm here to introduce the Estonian Minister of Environment, who has recorded a special message on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of SEI Tallinn. So thank you very much, Madis Kallas. Please play his message. Thank you.
Dear partners and colleagues, I would like to congratulate SEI Tallinn on its birthday. Like 30 years ago, when Estonia was facing important development choices and when wrong decision could have led to long-term negative outcome, today we are once again facing a moment that could provide us with new opportunities. At the moment, it may seem that dealing with environmental and climate issues is even more difficult than before. But pushing these issues aside or putting them on hold will not benefit us the long run. Climate has not stopped from changing, and we are still facing the results. This summer was the warmest in Europe, and the future trend is alarming. This affects directly our health, food supply and security. The energy crisis and war in Ukraine has made it worse. If we don't make investments into the cleaner energy and environment today, there may be fewer choices tomorrow, and they may run out of the much more painful from social, financial and political point of view. I believe that to some degree we are currently learning our lesson from not having been proactive enough in terms of developing clean energy fast enough during the past decade. It is the challenge that most of Europe is now trying to solve. Changes are happening with or without us. If we are proactive, then green transition will continue creating opportunities for us, and we will be able to offer our solution to the whole world. So it's important that both public and private sector understand the need to act for the sake of our own and especially our kids' future. The challenge of the green transition here and in the EU in general is to find solutions that will not leave anyone behind. Thought it should not become excuse not to act. The green transition will most likely speed up rather than slow down. We need to start training the experts who will work in the greener economy. This will not only help us tackle climate change, but also increase our energy security. Development of offshore wind farms has the greatest potential for Estonia. In addition to increasing the share of wind and solar energy, we must also increase the production and use of renewable gases. The government has set the national target of covering 100% with renewable electricity by 2030. We need to continue supporting green technologies and skills more than ever. Here we need to look for the opportunities that nature-based solution can provide us. Greening our cities will not only make them greener, but also turn them into the better place for living and therefore more competitive in the region. Non-governmental and research organizations have a great role in moving towards a more sustainable future by supporting the public and the private sector with up to the know-how. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here. And as we saw now, it's important to talk, but it's also important to be heard. So I'm glad that you're here. It's really a wonderful honor, really, to be here celebrating the 30 years of SEI Tallinn office. As we've heard, I mean, not only have you been here driving the sustainable development, but we've also heard already from Måns and Lauri how important the work of SEI Tallinn has been in really forming the policymaking in Estonia in the area of environment protection and climate work. And certainly also thank you so much from the part of the European Commission, because you've been a very good partner to the European Commission, and we continue to work together on those environmental and climate projects here in Estonia, and more on that later. You asked me to speak about building resilience through sustainability. And this is in fact exactly that we are doing with the European Green Deal. When we look at where we are, Europe is going now through the most challenging energy crisis that we've seen in modern history. We also have a clear eye on the devastating impact of the climate crisis across the entire planet, and especially here in Europe. And this has an impact on our lives, on our food production, on our economy, and also on our health. It's very clear that we need a fundamental change of how our societies are working. And allow me now to take you through 3 key areas that are important for our resilience. the work we're doing at the European level in our energy sector, in the area of food security, as well as in biodiversity. So first of all, on energy. Following this horrible invasion by Russia of Ukraine, global energy markets have been put under huge stress because Russia is clearly weaponizing energy supply at the scale that is finally obvious for everyone. The aim of the Green Deal in Europe is to end our dependence on fossil fuels. Now imagine, take a moment and think what would have been the debate on European reactions towards this Russia's unjustified aggression without our dependence on Russian energy sources. Luckily, however, we're moving fast on that. Already in March, the European leaders agreed to phase out Russian energy sources in the European market by 2027. Well, it looks like we're getting there even faster than that. Member states have already agreed that by the end of this year, we will no longer be buying oil from Russia. On gas, there's been a tremendous effort in looking elsewhere, going out, looking for supplies for LNG as well as for new alternative sources of gas to get through this winter. And this has brought the share of Russian gas in our whole energy mix of the European Union to 3%. We're at 3% now. Member states have also agreed to reduce their gas demand by 15% for this winter, and the Commission proposed only last week measures to flatten the peaks in electricity consumption, which trigger this expensive use of gas and then drive the prices up. But those steps are, of course, all for the short term. It's just to get through this winter. When we look at a way out of this crisis, then of course it goes through more renewables and more energy efficiency. For this, we need investment in grids, better interconnections, and faster permitting. This is what we're aiming to achieve in Europe. We have proposals on each and every one of those topics. And we also have funding available for that through the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which foresees at least 37% in each member state money for green projects. And it is also in this area that we are working from the European Commission side with the SEI Tallinn on advising the Estonian government of how to reform the Estonia's heating cooling system and the gas sector. So again, an area where the advice of our friends from SEI Tallinn is very, very valuable. Now, turning to food security. Russia has not triggered only a humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, it also is threatening a food security crisis worldwide by disrupting supplies and destabilizing global food markets. It's clear that in order to achieve long-term food security, we need to reorganize our food systems to be smart and sustainable. We have, from the European Commission side, again, put in place measures to help our farmers this year. There is additional financial support, there is more flexibility when it comes to state aid, there is a temporary derogation to allow for the production of crops to be used in fallow land. But in the long term, the answer to these concerns about food security is again more sustainability, both in farming as well as in our food sector in more general. 2 years ago, the Commission proposed to reduce the level of fertilizers used in our agriculture by 20%. Now, again, take a moment to think, where would we be if this had already been agreed and put in place? Where would we be in the current moment when our agricultural sector is under stress from the sanctions on Belarusian and Russian fertilizers, as well as from the increased prices for their production of fertilizers in the EU. So again, we should have been faster, but we're moving. We also need to fundamentally modernize the circle of food in order to be more resilient. By now, 1/5 of food produced in the EU is wasted. This costs around 140 billion of euros per year, but it's also estimated to make up almost 6% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So without a sustainable food system, we put food security at risk. And here, as elsewhere in the green transition, the costs of inaction greatly outweigh the costs of action and the costs of transition. We have to see how to work so that we don't get the food wasted. We have a perfect example here in the house. The restaurant upstairs in Fotografiska is exactly doing this, but we need more than that. We need better examples and more systematic approach again to avoiding food waste. We also need to make sure that our foods are produced in a smarter way, using precision agriculture, using less pesticides, and sorry to say, but each one of us also needs to see how to change our diets. It's of course not for the European Union, nor certainly not for the governments to tell people what to eat and when, but I think again, the work done by SEI Tallinn and other similar organizations is something where this awareness raising is very useful in helping people understand that the decisions and choices that we all make actually in our lives has an impact on our environment. So again, work is underway and we're going to make sure that we get the food security system in the European Union and more globally into a good shape. And then biodiversity. Isabella already mentioned the horrible events of this summer, which have been too blunt to show us in what a crisis our environment is. And the statistics, when you look at it, is not better than the events that we've seen this summer with the floods and the droughts and the extreme heat. Look at our soils. 70% of the soils in the European Union are in bad shape, and it already has impacts on food production in certain areas. Look at pollinators. 1 in 3 pollinators is in decline, yet we need them for 80% of production of our crop. And although here in Estonia we like to think of our country as a green oasis, we also have quite a lot of homework to do. The statistics show that we have an increased use in pesticides. We also see that the territory of the most biodiverse old forests has decreased quite dramatically. So a functioning system of nature and biodiversity, it's not something that is just nice to have. It's also something that is really important for our economy. We need it for many sectors in the European economy. The food sector, consumer goods, tourism, renewables, even the extractive industries. And this is why in June this year, the European Commission proposed a law that would require all member states to restore nature. The restoration doesn't mean more protected areas necessarily, because for the past 30 years, this is already that we've been doing. Our main focus has been on protection and safeguarding natural areas. But we see by now that protection is not enough. It will always be crucial, but it's not enough to reverse the loss of biodiversity in Europe. So that's why we put forward this proposal to require that by 2030, effective restoration measures are in place in 20% of the European Union seas and land area. It also requests that by 2050, restoration measures are there for all ecosystems that need it. It goes hand in hand with economic activity and even strengthens it. Because the economic logic there is very strong. When you look at it, when you prevent oil erosion, you're very active in helping food security. When you restore wetlands, you're avoiding floods in the cities downstream. And of course, it's extremely important for our climate. Nothing removes carbon more efficiently than our forests, wetlands, and seas. So here, I've given you an overview of the 3 key areas that are crucial for our resilience and how we have to act in all of those areas to make them more sustainable. Because we know that our societies, they won't be able to function properly without safe energy, food security, and biodiversity systems in place. The good news is that we know what to do. we have the solutions and we see what are the next steps that we need to act on. But now what we need is, of course, the courage and determination to push things through and make sure that we have the reforms in place in each and every one of our member states. And thanks to partners like SEI Tallinn, we are able to also push this understanding more at home, both to our political stakeholders as well as to the public at large. So thank you very much for SEI Tallinn again, and thanks a lot for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that message. Now, I think that Vivian and Madis have really set the scene for us. They've given us the big picture at the European, the global, and the Estonian scales around how building resilience through sustainability is a critical challenge for the EU and for Estonia. What we're going to do now is we have two panels. Each of those panels will be preceded by a catalyzing presentation from SEI experts. Our first panel is all about how to build a more sustainable and resilient urban environment. And we have two presentations for you from two of the fantastic experts at SEI Tallinn to introduce some of the ideas, some of the research that we're working on. Now, our first presenter dearly wanted to be here today. However, thinking that this is an anniversary event, looking back 30 years, celebrating 30 years, we're also very keen on thinking about the next generation, and he certainly is, because he and his partner had a child yesterday, which is the reason why he can't be here today. However, he has recorded his presentation, and now you will hear from Andreas Hoy, who will be talking about climate change in urban areas and the use of citywide climate sensor networks. Please play his video. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Andreas Hoy, and I want to talk about climate change in urban areas and why we need city climate networks. My first question is, do we really need more data? And the short answer is yes. If you want to have the long answer, then please stay tuned for this presentation. I want to start with some key facts. Urban climate differs from its surroundings, but observations and weather forecasts are made for rural areas, not where most people live, work, and sleep. We have a lot of data from satellites, from weather stations, from climate models, and so on, but they all need calibration from measurements in the city itself. With the City Climate Network we have set up for Tallinn, we are among the global forerunners, because only a few cities worldwide operate their own urban sensor networks. And with our data, we make urban climate challenges visible, we support decision makers and scientists, and we push climate action. Let's come to some details. So climate change hits cities stronger than rural areas. That's a fact. Why is it like this? The answer is urban grey. Buildings, rocks, parking lots, all those infrastructure, they lead to surface sealing, a lack of ventilation, and anthropogenic heat. That means that cities suffer from extreme weather impacts, especially during the summer. And where are our weather stations? This is a picture of the Tallinn weather station, which is nicely located at the outskirts of Tallinn city. The city center is 7 kilometers away. Let's come to two climate impacts. Heat. Heat waves are silent killers. Their impacts are not immediately visible, like for example for storm or flood damages, but they are among the deadliest natural catastrophes. The so-called urban heat island enhances the impacts of heat waves. The grey infrastructure of cities stores heat during the day and releases it during the night, and this reduces a nightly cooling down. We don't have enough or the right data to quantify the effect city space has on temperatures. Another climate impact is rain. Warming intensifies cloudbursts. Warmer air masses can take up more moisture, about 7% per 1 degree of warming, and this effect further increases for convective showers. It's about double the size. That means more energy, more precipitable water. The results are urban flash floods, and they are supported in cities by non-permeable surfaces. Grey infrastructure prevents soil infiltration, and that means water accumulates on streets, parking lots, and often also sealed depressions. Precipitation is extremely variable in space, and we don't have the data to quantify it. That's where we come into play. Our SEI Tallinn City Climate Network, is it one of many? It's not, because dedicated city climate networks are rare. There were none in the Baltics so far, and just a few in other European cities, mainly in Western and Central Europe. Why Tallinn? Maybe because being the green capital of Europe in the next year, Tallinn can or should be a role model for green-blue infrastructure planning. We provide data proving the city climatic value of green spaces in Tallinn. This all relates to the work we do inside Tallinn, supporting climate resilience, adaptation and mitigation, among others by improving the accessibility of weather, climate and related data. For this, we set up a network of 18 weather sensors measuring temperature, relative humidity and precipitation, and they are in operation since 21st of May 2022. This is how our SEI Tallinn City Climate Network looks like. The 18 sensors are distributed on or nearby the Pollinator Highway in Tallinn. This is a green strip of land which stretches from the city center to the outskirts. We placed 5 sensors directly on this Pollinator Highway in a green area. Then we have 5 in a mix of buildings and green spaces. And we put 5 sensors to areas with heavily infrastructure characterization like building, parking lots and so on. 2 sensors are at the shoreline to quantify the effect the sea has on Tallinn's climate, and 1 is near the official weather station for calibration purposes. This is what we find out. In summer, which means June, July and August this year, we clearly see the urban heat island in Tallinn. While in green spaces, the temperatures are comparable with the conditions measured outside of the cities. In areas with a lot of buildings and infrastructure, average conditions are about 1 degree warmer than in the surroundings. If we take the night, then it's about 2 degrees. If we take clear and calm conditions, then we can have differences of 4, 5 or more degrees. We also confirm the so-called urban dry island. This is the effect that in built-up spaces in city centers, the humidity is lower than in the surroundings. We also see this in our data. Let me come to one example of this summer. We had quite a severe heat wave at the end of June and beginning of July. The picture here shows the average daytime temperature of our 18 sensors. Temperatures are between 26 and 31 degrees. During the day, we clearly see the effect the sea has on Tallinn, because due to sea breeze, temperatures near the sea are lower than temperatures more at the outskirts of the city. During the night, the picture is different. Here, it's very important if we are in green or in gray spaces. In the city center and in built-up areas, temperatures on average stayed above 20 degrees. Nights with temperatures over 20 degrees are so-called tropical nights. They are problematic because in the night you want to get the heat of the day out of your room, and if it stays so warm, you have really difficulties to do so. In our data, we saw that, for example, in Tallinn's Old Town, during these heat waves, we had 6 tropical nights. And along the Pollinator Highway and in green areas, we had just a few or even none. If we come to rain, then convective showers and thunderstorms are spatially very variable. Some examples of those also occurred in 2022. Here's an example of 5th of July. We could see large spatial differences across city space. In some areas of the town, we had local overloads of the sewer system, while in other, little precipitation just came down. The official weather station in Tallinn Harku measured 2 millimeters of precipitation. And if we wouldn't have had those data, then we would really wonder why in some areas streets are flooded and in others there's almost nothing. Localized precipitation information can be used to study urban flash flood impacts, calibrate remote sensing datasets like radar data, and reduce connected risk and concretely support adaptation. Our data are open data. They are open to scientists, to city officials, urban planners, and so on. And we also set up a web page for the general public where we visualized hourly temperature and precipitation data. We have a 30-day data history and 4-day forecast. We also work on further access options and visualizations. So let's wrap it up. City climate data. Let's use them. Our Tallinn Weather Sensor Network already generates unique data insights. Like, for example, we see the climatic value of green compared to gray spaces, especially during heat waves. We can clearly see the effect the sea has on Tallinn's climate and how it shapes Tallinn's urban heat island. And we see the large spatial variability of precipitation patterns. That means our data shows the diversity of Tallinn's urban climate conditions and the variability of extreme weather events. We aim at further networks in other cities, like for example planned already for Pärnu and discussed for Helsinki, and we link our research to EU-level projects. To wrap it up, real-time data from where people live, work and sleep make climate communication more relevant. They can be a cornerstone for a green-blue city planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for that presentation. I'm now going to introduce you to another SEI expert, Heidi Tukkanen, and Heidi is going to talk to us about participatory planning and resilience. Heidi, do come up to the stage.
Thank you, Rob. So, my name is Heidi Tukkanen. I'm a senior expert at SEI Tallinn, and I work on climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction. I'm really happy to be here talking today about participation for equitable, resilient society. So, public participation. What is it? It's actually the basis for democracy. It's also really central to sustainable development and is clearly embedded here and reflected in the Sustainable Development Goal Target 16.7. Public participation is also a word that you hear a lot. Everybody is doing co-creation or co-production, and I think it's great. We need more of it. But these terms are actually used quite lightly. At best, public participation can bring together people from different perspectives to discuss, to negotiate, to debate, to innovate, and create a shared understanding of a certain situation. However, often it's a one-off thing, it's one-way communication, or maybe it even comes too late. There's countless cases in post-disaster recovery of risk mitigation implementation of things like seawalls and resettlement of communities, which have not been thought through to look at their final impact on societies. I was involved in a project some years ago where we looked at the long-term impacts of recovery on informal settlements in the Philippines, and actually what you see in the picture above is what the informal settlements that they had been moved from to like 25 to 50 kilometers north and inland to the picture that you see below. And this might look like a good change in most people's eyes, but however, many of these people's needs, basic needs, were actually unmet. These were people that were dependent on the sea for their livelihoods. They were fisher people. An early engagement with these people might have made the situation a little bit better for them in the long run. To face future challenges, we can't afford not to be inclusive in our participation. When we don't, we actually contribute to societal risk and we reinforce inequities. So is participation the key to a resilient society? It's probably not the only one, but I think it is a key, but only under certain conditions. I think the details of participation are actually quite important, and for me, these are the who and the how. Who's being engaged and who's being included? Are they the people that are active normally? Are they easily attainable? People that usually come to participatory events? Studies show that marginalized people who might be actually more difficult to engage are disproportionately affected by environmental impacts. And this means that their knowledge is actually really important to be accounted for in creating the solutions. And then the how. Is the participation that's being planned, is it process-oriented or is it a one-off thing? Does it enable learning for all sides, meaning the people that are invited to participate, but also the people that are organizing the participation, the decision makers? Does it create new ways of dealing with each other and engaging with each other? Does it account for the power imbalances that are within groups and also between the organizers and the people participating themselves? And who is actually making the decision at the end of the day? This type of planning actually is radically different from what we normally do. Now I'll talk about another example, and this one is actually a positive one. Over the last 5 years, I've been involved in an initiative called City Health and Wellbeing Initiative, funded by the Swedish International Development Agency, and we call it CHU. In CHU, we were studying how rapidly changing secondary cities are affecting the well-being of their residents. And in these photos, you can see actually some of our activities. We were doing some participatory mapping with waste. We're doing participatory risk mapping, also looking at common outdoor areas, and looking at the impacts on people's health of walking around in different urban areas. And we also had a lot of different kinds of stakeholder engagement events, both with residents as well as broader stakeholders. We were also quite affected by COVID during 3 of the 5 years of our project. But now, despite COVID, we are actually seeing some of these impacts. We have new kinds of data, environmental and health-related data that can be applied to planning processes. We have new partnerships that are actually interested in looking at how to use these participatory methods in, for example, planning climate change adaptation for informal settlements. And then the next 2 impacts that I'm going to talk about are ones that I think are actually more important even than these more visible impacts, and that's how the community and the local authorities relate to each other. Through the participatory research, the residents of the informal settlements actually gained a voice. They were able to document their concerns, and they understood better the decision-making process through the engagement with the local authorities. And the local authority, they also recognize the capacities and the experience and the knowledge that these informal settlements have. They also realize the limitations of planning using standardized planning procedures in an informal settlement, and are open to looking at how to create together with these communities. And I think these things are maybe even more important for future resilience. So before I finish, I wanted to make a plug for some of the tools that we have in SEI Tallinn created in the last couple years related to climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction. The Be Green tool is something that has been very local in Tallinn as well. You heard about some of the Be Green work in Andreas's presentation, but we've also been working on participation. Cascade was actually looking at working with urban planners, but also emergency and rescue services, and came up with some participation-related guidance for that. And then in 2 projects in SEI, we've been working more globally. I've talked about both of them here in this presentation. And with 2, we will actually be launching our toolkit for participatory methods next year. So to wrap up, I think that participation can be used to strengthen society, to face our future challenges. But I think that the way that we do it actually needs to radically change. And I think that we need to think about the who and the how in planning those processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heidi. You and Andreas, I think, have really brought home to us 2 aspects, perhaps, the data side and the people side, but also that bringing those 2 together, using participatory methods, can really empower people to bring about change in their communities, and do that through engaging in local regulations, local environment. I think it's a fantastic start to our first panel discussion. And I've got an amazing panel for you. It's extraordinary. We have a former Deputy Prime Minister. We have a city architect. We have the CEO of a mobility company. And we also have an expert in social change. It is really a fantastic panel that we have. I'd like to invite the panel to come up on the stage, please. So, Toonis, Margit, Kristin, and Christian, please come up onto stage, and I shall introduce you in a bit more depth. Yes, please. Yes, perch on the bar stools, guys. I'm sorry there isn't an actual
It's like a band
that I can serve you anything from.
If I fall.
Sorry about that. So look, great that you're with us. Thank you so much for being part of this panel discussion. So we're still going to be focusing on the questions around how to build a more sustainable and resilient urban environment. And you all bring different perspectives to this. But I'm going to start actually with Toonis Arius, who is the city architect for the last 10 years or so of the city of capital. Yeah, and you're also head of the Department of Urban Design as well. Toonis, can you tell us a little bit about the city of Tartu and what its challenges are, and perhaps some of the successes you've already seen as it strives to be a beacon for sustainability and resilience?
A beacon sounds nice, but thank you, Robert. Definitely. I must start with a commercial. I'm sorry. Just to say that in 2024, Tartu is the capital of culture of Europe. So everybody's invited there. You must be there. And what I want to point out also is that the concept of our European capital of culture is called Arts of Survival. And it was thought of about 4 years ago. And today, after these 3 years of all kinds of mess we've seen, this concept, Arts of Survival, really has, taken a turn or two. And it is basically about resilience. That's what the concept is about. So 24, it's all about resilience, also on the culture side. But talking about Tartu, just to give a kind of a background for you all who don't know, Tartu is quite a small city, 100,000 people. It has been quite a compact city in its urban planning concept due to different reasons, mostly geographical reasons. But it was quite harshly destroyed during the Second World War, especially the historical center. So even up until now, there is, in a way, there's great potential in the city center. But at the same time, the city has been, concentrated around its heart. And as with all organisms, the strength of the heart is the most important part of the organism. So that's the case in Tartu also. And I guess one of the challenges we started to see about 2008, 2010 was the effects of suburbanization, services closing in the city center. And so this was a huge challenge we had to deal with. And I must say, we've been successful. I think we've been really successful during the last 10 or 12 years because the city center is vibrant. We used mostly modern planning tools to keep this vibrancy. I think we use planning more like a form of dialogue with all the owners to really pump up development also around the city and in the city center. And one of the best example from this dialogue process has been with the University of Tartu. They had a choice at one point whether to build their newest building in the city center or away from the city center into the modern campus. And this was thanks to this dialogue, thanks to the planning tools, that we got the choice that the newest building is in the city center, next to the river Emajõgi, and close to the historical campus in the old town. So I guess this is the biggest success story I have to tell you. And of course, there are a number of other stuff I would like to say, but that would take hours.
Don't worry, Tonis. There'll be plenty more time for more discussion as well. But I'd like to move on. You've actually mentioned the university in Tartu, and we have an eminent researcher based at the university with us, Madis Kallas. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Margit, you teach something that sounds amazing, transition and social change. It's amazing. Can you give us some examples of successful social change, perhaps in an urban environment? What are the ingredients that make it happen?
Well, thanks for inviting. It's a privilege to be here. And when I was posed this question over email, I started to think that what is the top of mind of success? And there is one thing, you turn to Dr. Google and start finding the examples. And of course, there are all sorts of lists and rankings of cities that are successful in terms of resilience and sustainability. And of course, Stockholm and the Nordic capitals come up on those lists, Oslo and Copenhagen, and they must be doing something right, obviously. Then another interesting thing that popped up is Bristol. I've never been there. I have a few good colleagues there. But what the story about Bristol said, one thing, it's unmistakable, unique identity, and another is university. Tartu University is not ranked in the Sustainable Universities ranking because it's a hell of a lot of work to get all the data together. And we are just starting to speed up our efforts in terms of sustainability, both research and teaching at the university level. So we are not sure whether we want to see the place in the ranking of our university just yet. We need to do more. But yes, a university is an ingredient. And when I come closer to home, then I was born in Tallinn. And I lived here many, many years, but for some reason I moved away to Tartu, and now I'm passionately in love with Tartu. I can continue that story, the success of Tartu. But yes, Tallinn must also be doing something right because the European Green Capital label is not given just onto an empty place. And yes, I can't escape Tartu. I think the ingredient of success, yes, there are lots of theories about that, about socio-technical change and all that, and we can maybe talk about that later, but just for the start, to give a more personal touch, I think the spirit and the identity of a city. I have a daughter who's 16 years old, and she has certain literary ambition, I would say. And she submitted a short story to a literary contest of Värske Rõhk. Maybe some of you know that. This is a young literature journal in Estonia. And a couple of months ago, she came, "Oh, Mummy, they accepted my short story. They're going to publish it." And then I said, "Show me." And it had quite an ambitious headline. Its headline was "The Spirit of Tartu," Tartu Vibe. And actually, it's quite a quiet, observant story of the city. But the point I'm making is that as long as we are successful in continuing to provide inspiration for young people, I think then we are doing something right.
Thank you, Margit. Thank you. I'm now going to move on to our next panelist. And I mean, her biography is so long. I will do a very brief summary.
Yes, please do. Don't make me feel like a dinosaur.
I'd never do that, Kristin. So, Kristin Halvorsen, wonderful to have you here. You are actually a member of SEI's board. And,
yes, I am.
It's wonderful that you are that. But you're also director of the Centre for International Climate Research. You're a former Deputy Prime Minister. You're a former Minister of Finance, a former Minister of Education and Research. And I'll stop there because I'll run out of breath otherwise. But it's wonderful to have your experience on this panel. And I sort of want to provoke you. We've heard a lot about some of the challenges, both from Lauri in his description of the transformation and transition that Estonia has gone through and is continuing to go through. We've also heard from Andreas about issues to do with urban heat islands and the like. As a former policymaker and someone really deep, do you think that policy needs to be more interventionist? Because really, we know what some of these problems are, but the change isn't quite happening as quickly as possible. Do we need to be more interventionist from policy side? And if so, how and in what sectors?
Yeah, I do believe they do, but I also do believe that politicians have to be brave, but not too brave. Or not too rushy, because they need to be in the forefront, but still convince the people of the town of the direction that you are going to go into. And a lot of conflicts are connected to the topics that, for instance, you mentioned. For instance, what do we do with all the cars? Should they take over the center of the towns, or how should we deal with that? It's often a very high level of conflict connected to that in the beginning. But then when you have removed all the cars from the city centers, no one wants them back. So it's actually some kind of art to be a politician in the forefront, but not to rush too much and then convince people to go along with you. And cities, of course, they have a lot of... My work now is in CICERO, which is similar to SEI, and we are collaborating. We could collaborate more. We contribute to the IPCC report, and the role of the cities is really underlined in the latest report and will be very important, because today around 50% of the world's population live in cities. In a few years, maybe it will be 70% of the world's population living in cities. And we need to combine climate adaptation and mitigation. And that is really extremely challenging. And when we are adapting to climate change, of course, everything that has to do with water and green and shades is of great importance. And of course, we also have to do our part of the 70% of the emissions come from cities. So it's really, if you really are going to make a change, you should, be elected as a politician in Tallinn or Stockholm or Oslo or, somewhere else.
Thank you so much.
SCT.
Thank you, Kristin. Yes, the importance of mayors and this local, as you say, it's where the people are, but it's also where so many emissions are associated with. But one shouldn't, of course, forget and get too much of the carbon tunnel vision. We've heard also about green environment. But you mentioned a little bit about mobility in cars and how to be brave without alienating. I'm now going to turn to our last panelist. Our last panelist is Christian Maruste. He is the founder of Go Mobility. Go Mobility, if I'm right, you do some Internet of Things stuff for scooters, electric scooters. You actually manufacture electric scooters. the only company outside China that does that.
Correct.
This isn't an infomercial, sorry. But
it's a big thing.
it's a big thing. And you also run a scooter network. Now, here we've got a mobility question for you. Getting around town has really been disrupted by your electric scooters and others. But how sustainable is it really? How sustainable is it financially and environmentally?
So it's mega sustainable. Because an electric scooter or an electric bike or a regular bicycle, it doesn't matter, it's a light vehicle, is about 200 times, has 200 times less mass, weighs little, right? Costs 30 times less, takes, 100 times less energy to move, has no emissions, no sound emissions and no, tailpipe emissions. So it's by far the best way to move around city, besides walking maybe. But if you are walking after eating beef, then maybe that even pollutes more. So might be a thing there because a wheel and an electric motor are extremely efficient. So these vehicles are for sure here, to stay. I think when we look at scooter sharing, as an operation on the streets, then the start has been extremely bumpy. And this has been because of venture capital money. It has been because of greed, of huge amounts of billions of dollars being pumped into there, where the goal was not to build good services, but the goal has only been to grow and show exponential growth and push up their valuations. This has kind of ended. Air has coming out. These companies are dropping, and now the second wave of significantly more sustainable, well thought through, better technology, is emerging and coming out. And I think what you pointed out is a wonderful point that whenever you get cars outside of the city centers, everybody loves that, but you still need to move, somehow from A to B. And it doesn't matter if it's an electric scooter or an electric bike or a cargo bike or a regular bike, as long as you can move in a non-emissionless and light way. This is for sure the way forward. And I wanted to also add that it's weird that there's 3 people from Tartu on the stage because I just came from the train from Tartu directly here. Our company is based in Tallinn. We connect bikes and scooters, so we serve globally. We have connected around 1 million vehicles. But I'm also born in Tartu. I've never gone to Tartu's university, but I ended up, we now have 3 kids, I also ended up moving back there. So city planning, urban space, and this spirit have a very big impact on, personal decisions people make.
Yeah. Listen, can I follow up a little bit? I mean, there's a lot of this disruptive micro-mobility in a city like Stockholm, which is where I live. But there's also been somewhat of a backlash, which I think you mentioned. And I was wondering whether you had a message for or a request for someone like Tunis or a policymaker.
Yeah, what is very important to understand is that an electric scooter is the most regulated vehicle ever to be there in humankind. Like ever. And I'll give you an example. Around half a year ago, a BMW crashed into 2 people standing in a bus stop, killing 2 people that had nothing to do, just standing in the bus stop in Tallinn. After that, there was absolutely no articles about why can cars go 200 kilometers an hour in a city center. In Estonia, there's only 1 person who has died because of electric scooters in the past 5 years, and we have constant discussions how we should limit their speed, how there are different areas where they're not allowed, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's huge over-regulation for this. And the only reason for that is that cars have always been there, right? It's like, alcohol and drugs. We talk very little about banning alcohol, but drugs are really bad because alcohol has always been there, although it creates the same issues. So I would like to believe that we are at the darkest moment of over-regulating micromobility, because I haven't found a single person, whether it's politicians, police, decision makers, who have actually been able to argue with me why they are bad. Because the facts don't show that they're bad. They take significantly less space. They don't emit. They are actually, helping us on all of our green goals, environmental goals, sustainability goals. So it's a very, very emotional topic. It's very much of new things are to be afraid of. I always bring this example that when cars arrived to the world, and they had one person walking in front of the car to make sure that the cars don't bump into other cars and people. I think we're a little bit in that moment. But I said once more, what you discussed very much is that people, unfortunately, don't like very sudden change, right? And you have to mitigate it, and you have to talk it through, and you kind of gradually have to make it happen. What happened with the scooter sharing as such was that as it was fueled by venture capital money, nobody cared about, doing the right things. Everybody just pushed them out very, very heavily. I think, 5 years from now, you will have significantly more privately owned vehicles rather than those sharing vehicles. So I think they will move into actually people owning these vehicles and riding them around themselves, which will also, organize it much more.
Very interesting, Christian. That will bring us into another a path around sharing and circular models of ownership, and we'll come to that. But I know that Christian...
I'm sure you didn't spend any time in Oslo during last summer, because then all these scooters were, not killing people, but hurting people, because they were mixed on pavements and pedestrians and bicycling and cars. It was a mess. But now we have regulated. So I think they find some kind of a balance. It's
extremely, I mean, nobody says you shouldn't regulate, new things. The question is just where do you draw the line, right? Yeah. Because the problem is that if you say that these things can only move, let's say 20 kilometers an hour and in these areas, and you can't park them there, and there, then you're actually killing, it as well. So.
Yeah, but I think, we found a solution like we found with cars. Because when the cars first came, it was in the beginning of the 60s that ordinary people in Norway could afford a car or were able to buy a car because it was regulated before that. And then cars were allowed everywhere. A lot of children were killed in accidents. It was a very few cars and a lot of children killed because we didn't regulate. So we have to find some kind of a balance in the cities.
And probably it's mostly about infrastructure, because
Absolutely.
we've been building the cities around cars all the time, not all the time, for the past 80 or 100 years. And that has given us also the culture. And we don't have this culture of micromobility right now. No. But this one point you brought out, the fear of change, now that is something really interesting. I have a good example from Tartu. Again, we were doing 3 years ago this project called Car-Free Avenue, a Freedom Avenue. That's the official name. We closed it down for 1 month in the summer for all kinds of events. And what's the polite word for it? A shitstorm came from it. Articles, all the kinds of articles. Why do you do this? It's the main street, in the city center next to the river. You can't possibly do this. And for comparison, next year, a main street, a thoroughfare, was closed for 5 months for new asphalt. No articles, no opinions, nothing happened. And it's this fear of change that really upsets people, that something is maybe taken away from us. But another point I want to make is the shitstorm was mostly before the event started. When we had the concept on paper, when we were trying to speak with people, what's the idea about? And when we opened it, or closed it and opened it as a public space, it changed overnight, because that's when the people came out. They understood the impact, they understood the point, and they saw the value with their own eyes. So that's really important. And at one point, we must really act. As you said, the politicians, at one point, they have to act, because you can't just talk through it. You have to see it with your own eyes, the change.
You've been talking about culture, the car culture and the transition and fear of change. I was just wondering whether there's anything that we can take from the research that you're involved in around if fear holds us back. Are there other things that we can do to counter that? Or are there other reasons why, given what we know, we're still not making the right sorts of investments and putting the right sorts of policies in place?
There is one issue that I've been tackling with in my research over the years is sort of what sociologists would actually call the myths about social change. One is the delegation of change onto the individual shoulders. And this has to do a lot with fear and motivation and attitudes, and there is this very popular and a very convenient phrase of awareness raising, that if we only raised sufficient amount of awareness and if only the people had the right knowledge, they would behave in the right way. Usually they don't. And there is the value action gap, sociologists call it that way, or an attitude behavior gap. It has many names. And the second is also the behavior impact gap, that if you make those small incremental changes in your behavior, you're actually not achieving much. Yes, you might switch to vegan diet, but overall its impact is minuscule and it demotivates you. So this one thing is really we should be cautious about is to talk too much about individuals and their behaviors. And I think if we take the focus of a city, it's a perfect place where we can look at the fabric of the city in all its socio-material configurations, people and nature and infrastructure and objects. And so the cities are networks or systems. So if we take this more holistic view on resilience and sustainability and look at in a systemic way how all those different components align or misalign, then we get a completely different view or change, rather than talking about individuals and their behavior change and also techno-fix, that the next best technology is going to solve our problems. This is again an easy way of thinking about it. There is an anthropologist, Clifford Geertz, who used to say that it is a sort of elitist view on naughty and fuzzy social problems that they can be solved with technology. It's usually not the problem of technology. It's usually the problem of people.
Yeah.
So techno-fix is one thing, awareness is another, but there is a whole array of other sorts of interventions that we need to think about. Building environment, slowly changing norms, regulation, all aligning them all together. This is a gigantic task, but the only way, because just quick fixes, they never bring about change.
Kristen,
I think this is crucial knowledge when we are discussing climate change and how to make people support the necessary changes that we have to do, all of us. And we don't lack the technology. We know all the technology that will take us to a low carbon society. We lack the necessary support from people. And we have a lot of experience in that. For instance, banning of smoking indoors. At restaurants. I was a politician at the time when we had laws against smoking on restaurants and everything. Now, I was really extremely scared. I was worried that my neighbors, because I live in this part of Oslo that is not so posh, it was not so posh at that time. I thought, oh, they will go home, they will sit home drinking alone. This will be not a catastrophe, but I was worried. It took half a year maybe, and everyone accepted it because it was no good arguments for smoking indoors, polluting the air for everyone, those who were working there, visitors. And that is an example that you implement restrictions and then people will accept it if there are good reasons for doing so. So I think that is extreme. That is maybe the most important research we need now. That is how to, make people support the necessary changes.
Yeah. That's a wonderful example. I bring this very often, that my mission is that when my kids grow up, they're 5, 3, and 0, that when my kids grow up, then they will look at how we look at smoking indoors. They will look the same way into emissions in a city. And they will come to me and say, Dad, how was it possible that you had these cars and then gases were coming out of them? It just seems so, deadly. Why did you do that? So, and if you guys, travel outside, China is a very good example because in China you can still smoke indoors. if you go to a pub and people smoke there, it just feels totally mental.
Yeah.
Like I grew up in nightclubs when smoking was still allowed, but now if you experience it once more, it just feels so like unbelievable why they do that. So you get used to it very quickly. So I hope that in the next 10 years we get to the same level in our cities, the urban air.
We even smoked on planes, in the back of planes, but not in the forefront. It was.
It's great to hear these examples of how brave decisions can actually change norms more quickly than you might expect, and that resistance almost prefigures the change. That's where you get the moment of resistance. We've talked quite a lot about sort of emissions, whether they're emissions of air pollutants or greenhouse gases. But we mustn't just focus on that. We've talked about the importance of green spaces, or heard about the importance of green spaces. And for this, I wonder whether you could perhaps talk a little bit about how you see, either with examples from Tartu or from other places, how green spaces are crucial, not only for human health and well-being, but also perhaps for biodiversity.
Yeah, it is a huge factor because, you know, the key of a city, really, when we talk about urbanization, it is about, you know, bringing together people, right? In order for them to generate new ideas, to cooperate, then they have to really work together. That's the key of a city. But at the same time, you have to have a great balance of the built environment and the green environment, the blue environment, in order to be healthy, to be active, to have an urban environment where you want to live. That's why you moved to Tartu in the first place, and me too. I'm also from Tallinn, actually. and finding this balance is a key issue. And when we're talking about urbanization today, for an urban planner, it sounds like a really nice word, you know, urban as a place for people to come together, urbanization as actually a really efficient way to live, taking up less and less land for one person and cooperating in a small space. That's perfect. That's the key to resilience, actually. The point is that the urbanization we are seeing today is not really urbanization in that sense. It's more of a sprawl that we are seeing. And the sprawl is the problem today also in Tartu. What was it? I think during 10 years in Estonia, we have taken up more and more green land under the cities. It was about 7 small city size have been generated, you know, where we live, where we work, and where we produce things. And it's coming, you know, taking down the forests, taking down the agricultural lands. That's where these new living environments are coming from. And there's another part of it, which is, you know, leaving the existing urban fabric. And that's what sprawl really is. And when we look at the problem today with the soaring energy prices, the soaring petrol prices, this kind of a sprawled environment, that's a really risky trend. And we haven't really tackled it. We've been talking about this issue for 10 or 20 or 40 years, and we still haven't had the real, true, you know, solving factors for this. And the trend is still continuing, building a really kind of a risky society for us. While I'm talking about it in the sense of green environment, we should never look at the green environment in a bubble in one municipality. They're all interconnected with the all different kinds of municipalities all around. And right now, when we are also in Tartu, we are cooperating with the neighboring municipalities, seeing their urban plans where they have in their master plan less greenery plan than in Tartu. That's a real, you know, signal of threat to our environment in Estonia in general. And this is something we need to tackle. And at the same time, when we talk about sprawl, what it means more mobility. The services, of course, are in the center, again, in the strong heart. And that means more mobility, more space for covered land in asphalt. That's where micromobility really comes in. Because with your electric vehicle, electric scooter, or electric bicycle, you can travel bigger distances. So you can have less land for asphalt, more land for green spaces. But yeah, so it's a really, really mixed and really complex issue. And when we talk about intervention, the changes in these trends, they can't be done only in one municipality. They can be done with everybody as a whole, as a mutual goal.
Can I ask a little bit about, often I hear, actually in the context of Stockholm, but in other cities, of the need to retain or even increase the density of many urban environments, partly to avoid the sprawl effect. The amazing examples of some of the American cities and just how gigantic they are in their urban sprawl compared to some European cities. If we need to grow our cities, make them vibrant, give them a spirit, and a spirit that is part of this sort of transformation. How do we do so, but at the same time deal with the challenges that Andreas is talking about in terms of urban heat islands or the need for green space, the pollinator corridors? How are you going to deal with that?
That's a really good point, that densification sounds like a key to everything, you know. But at the same time, we were just meeting with our colleagues from Tampere in Finland. They said they have huge density, you know, and all of the recreation areas are full of people. They don't have anywhere to go right now. So that's the issue, to find this balance. And of course, there are modern planning tools today for architects and planners to really think about the biodiversity while planning the city already and the newer parts of the city. All kinds of green factors that you can use, like green roofs, vertical gardens, everything that you can use. You have to use these methods also at the same time. But one point is mobility. Right now, the key word is really changing mobility, because this is something that takes away the public space, the very limited public space that we have in the cities. We will not tear down buildings to create new parks, but we should think really about redefining this public space.
One thing we haven't talked so much about is money. We've heard a little bit about the venture capital that's come in for some of these micro-mobility services. But I'm wondering a little bit about what sort of scale of investment might be needed to bring this resilient vision to realize it, and where's that coming from? Is it something that needs to be, brought in through public money or private money or a combination of the two? How do you see that?
I can just say that an electric scooter or a bike is by far the cheapest version of travel for the municipality, because you need less of the road. Like, you don't really need too much of a good infrastructure, right? And I think this is something that is very often overlooked. That it's kind of looked at, hey, bicycle is an issue because we have to build bicycle tracks. A bicycle track is probably 10 times cheaper than buying a car or building a car road. So for sure, you can save money if you make less roads. And one thing I wanted to point out in Tartu's case was that Tõnis actually wanted to close one of the main highways of the city this summer.
Redefine it.
Yeah, basically. I would call it closing. I would love it. So, but the problem was that they got a lot of backslash. But you didn't get the backslash, in my mind, from the people living in the city, but you got them exactly from the suburbs, because this is a road that's really used to get into the city and get out of the city and actually go through the city. So if you looked at a lot of comments were also that, how can I now go to the other side of the city, right? And I think this is a place where it's important to collaborate with the suburbs, right, and other municipalities around you. But at one point, you should really say, hey, I'm a city. I have my population here. Should I really care that people get through my city and use this as a highway? I think you shouldn't, right? I think a city should really build for the people who live in that city. And if you make these big highways significantly smaller, then you're also fighting against this fancy word you had, sprawl, yes. Because people just have so much more, it's so much more complicated for them to get to work in the morning, so live in a city. I think, this is a place where you should also say a city is for the people who live in the city, not for the people who can go through the city.
I guess we also shouldn't punish people who haven't made the choice.
Why not?
But the question is... So, I respect your honesty.
If people drink alcohol and get disease of that, it's their fault. Of course, we help them. But if they live there, you shouldn't punish, but you shouldn't build infrastructure for them.
Exactly.
That's my point.
And the question, also your question about financial incentives, that's really the backbone of the problem, really. Today, when you can make the choice of sprawling around, doing this choice mostly when you don't have to think about petrol oil prices. Now you do. Now you don't make this choice so easily. But at the point when you are buying this plot of land somewhere, in this price number, you don't see these future problems. You don't see your dependence on fuel, you don't see on your dependence on gas at that point, and it seems really feasible. It seems really cheap, because you can't find a big enough apartment in the city center for a comparable price. Now that's where the financial incentives should come in, that at that point we will have also kind of a price number seeing or showing you what are the future costs, the future emissions also. And maybe we shouldn't sprawl around if there's already an emissions cost in the development or starting the development.
Can I come back to Margit for a moment? You were talking earlier about how we shouldn't be blinded by a call for individuals to make the change solely. It should be looking at the system as a whole. We should be taking a systemic perspective. You might be familiar with the phrase or the acronym NIMBY. NIMBYism, not in my backyard. I was just wondering, I mean, that's an example of fear, of perhaps not wanting to see a change. But we need to somehow overcome that. We need to overcome some of that individual resistance. Have you got any sort of tips to a policymaker as to how they might go about doing that if you're thinking about sort of social change?
Well, the popular sort of recommendation is, of course, community engagement and participation and making the local community benefit from those developments. And I understand that this is much easier said than done, because community engagement is like we heard in the previous presentation, it's not an easy thing to do, because people have very different skills of participating, and the ones who do have the skills are usually very vocal, but they can be easily misled by different types of disinformation. And once this kind of myths and disinformation wall has been built, it's very difficult to crumble that. But overall, I think the developers do make mistakes too, because and this local benefit model and how the local communities, in case when we speak about wind turbines, is only now just being regulated and thought how we can launch it and do it. So we are making the first steps of how really people can see the benefits. Maybe, as this ugly saying goes, that don't let the crisis go to waste. Maybe the present energy crisis shows us that renewable energy should be sped up. So there are different factors playing. But again, yes, this. We need a more nuanced way of just, selling those wind turbines or some new development or some new technology to people to make them respond, because this is a much, much more complex process. And I know sociologists often say everything is complex and doesn't help much. But actually we are trying to actually hands-on go and help the Eesti Energia or the Enefit Green to do a smaller collaboration project. They really want to, which is a very, I think, progressive, and makes my heart melt, how an enterprise comes to university to search for help, and not from the technologists, but from the social scientists, to ask how we actually engage with the community. And then we are probably launching some sort of a co-creative process with them, because there is no easy fix how you go and do it with the community. It has to be very contextualized. So we are getting on our hands into that very soon, I hope. So it's going to be an interesting experiment for us as well. But it's never just words. There must be some sort of benefits for the local communities to accept whatever it is.
Kirsten, I mean, the benefits.
I fully agree.
And how do we share those benefits so that there is this sense of ownership?
Ownership, yes, exactly.
We've had this change in opinion when it comes to onshore windmills in Norway. And the reason for that, I think, is that the permits for building this was given 10 years ago. And when it was built, it was twice the size. in many, there was no return of income to the local municipalities, and it was all just the disadvantages. So we have to do that in a completely different way. But maybe also it's much more expensive not to build resilient cities than to do the work in the planning when it comes to adaptation and when it comes to reducing emissions. And we are going to invest in these cities anyway, so let's do it in a resilient way. And what we haven't spoken so much about is that urbanization is mainly taking part in the big cities in Africa and Asia. And the key to success is good governance, financial resources, involving people, and that is maybe our biggest challenge. So if we have some good example, maybe we could, discuss it with the rest of the world.
One thing I would like to add is what Tõnis also brought out in the beginning, is I really feel that people need somebody like a third party to look to. And Tõnis brought this example that they moved the university building into the central town. In Tartu, everybody respects university, right? It's like the thing. So if the university says it's a good thing, then people also kind of follow. And I think that's also a very important way to find third parties, whether there are some NGOs, whether there are enterprises that give work to people, and get them on your side, because then you have always somebody on the third party to look through and say, oh, okay, if they say it's a good idea, then maybe it's a good idea. Because otherwise, the only third party is press, and press usually just wants headlines, right? They don't really push you correct data, and it always gets very wobbly. So I think buying in people, having somebody else who says it's a good idea is very beneficial.
The key of communication, never speak alone. One thing from an official side, as I'm an official in a city government, I do see that my colleagues, they have kind of, in some cases, they are tired of engagement or participatory projects because they have the wrong tools for it.
Yeah.
And they are used to very simple meetings where they invite people to discuss a certain master plan, for example. And usually come the ones who like a free microphone, and then they come there. Whatever the topic is, they're there talking that thing. It doesn't matter what's on the wall right now. And so we need to invite new tools. And we, for example, we tested a really cool tool with our local NGO Rohetiger. In English, what's it, like Green Tiger, RAR. And it was about a climate assembly. So bringing together people who are selected to be a representative body of the citizens. So you have to have the correct number of, male and female, education, etc., and from different regions. And we had a really cool and deep process of learning, discussing, and finally making choices for the city by the people. And that was something really that showed, I guess, also to the officials that the right tools are the key. Don't throw your hammer on the ground on engagement and participation. There is a way.
I was just browsing through the recommendations by the Tartu Climate Assembly on the website this morning. And it was a huge table of all sorts of things. A lot to do, of course, with cars and greenery and pedestrian walks. This was a very burning issue because we had a very heavy winter. And the second column was the city government's reaction to those. And most of them said that, yes, we are taking this into account. And there was some that need planning in the next budget cycle. But that was a pleasure to see, yes.
We're reaching the end of our time for this wonderful panel. I'm going to ask one last question that tries to unite a little bit what Kristin was talking about, which is that a huge amount of urban development is not going to be taking place in Tartu compared to maybe Lagos, for example. And I'm just wondering whether you can just leave us one by one with something that you see that can be learnt from the experience here or in Norway or elsewhere that is going to be relevant for these rapidly urbanizing places in the world. And I'll start with Kristin.
I have to think about that. No, I think that to dare to do something that is controversial in the first place, but that will give people living there some benefits, and that's easy to see in just a few months. I think that is the main recipe, because then you can see the changes, you can see before and after, you can convince people to go one step further.
Be brave enough to pick
Yeah.
the low-hanging fruit in the first place. Martin.
Yeah, I'm just following up on the point, the third part, to good intermediaries. The research also shows that intermediary parties who are specifically trained to bring people out of their silos, they are needed, and we are doing that on the master's level at the university. So it doesn't happen by itself.
No.
It needs to be trained specifically.
It's hard to pinpoint one certain thing, but in general, I guess it's more about cooperation. And right now, what I didn't mention is Tartu is also in this 100 climate neutral and smart cities mission, also climate adaptation mission. And the key there is, Tartu with its complex issues, it's not really different from many other cities in Europe. Although we are in the boreal region, and when we go into details in energy efficiency or biodiversity, of course, there are very specific things we have to do, which is specific to our region. And it's fun to cooperate sometimes with the Spains or some other guys. But the general problems are the same. And the mission, for example, that's a huge cooperation platform for different cities around Europe. And I guess that's the key word, to inspire each other, bring up new tools, new data solutions, and then, benefit from some stuff we've done in all around Europe.
Yeah. Best practice leading to greater scale,
Exactly.
leading to bigger impact.
Yeah.
From mobility perspective, it's quite easy. When in Europe we pay money for you to buy an electric car, then Southeast Asia for many years has already paid you money to buy an electric moped, because they're running on mopeds. And I have good friends in Africa who are developing vehicles, motorcycles, electric motorcycles for Africa that are charged directly from sunlight. The issue they have is that they don't have good access to gasoline. So if you look at Africa and urbanization and mobility, then it's similar like we in 91. We never had faxes and checkbooks because we directly went into internet banking, right? Because we are lagging so much behind. The same thing is going to happen in Africa. Nobody's going to actually build, gasoline-based mobility because they are just getting there, and they will automatically go to electricity because it's just cheaper, much easier to maintain, and more accessible to them. So I think from light mobility or urban mobility, we're actually in a relatively good place looking forward there.
Thank you very much, this fantastic panel. An applaud for them, please. We have a very short break before we come back for our second panel. So please, don't go too far. I think there might be some coffee, but please, we're going to be sitting down again in no more than 10 minutes. Hello, welcome back. I hope you've had a good break. I can see the canelés were very popular over there in the corner. Do come back and sit down now. We're going to kick off our second panel discussion with another presentation from one of SEI Tallinn's fantastic experts. And I'd like to invite to the stage Javad Kapoor, who's going to talk to us about Estonian pathways to climate neutral and resilient energy sector. Javad, please.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me today. It's been a pleasure to be here to talk about climate change and energy security, which has been my passion in the last 15 years. And what makes it more special today is that everybody talks about the energy crisis. Of course, being in a crisis is not very happy, but of course, having this topic on top makes it special. And then, of course, to be here to talk about this in the 30th anniversary of SEI Tallinn. Today, we are going to talk about the way ahead of us for basically forming a resilient energy system to the energy transition. So basically, starting from the very scratch, we all know that the current energy system is something more or less linear, meaning that there is the one way ahead from the energy production to the network and obviously to the final consumption. And in particular, because of the unbundling, it has been like the situation that nobody intervenes to others' tasks. But things are going to change with the very carbon neutral system. So we will have new actors like presumers who will contribute to energy production while they are also consuming energy. Also, as you can see here in the right side, we have a newcomer, the storage. Of course, traditionally we have had, but it will play a more vibrant role in the system. So it means that when we talk about the energy transition, it's not like the one unfinished transition that was supposed to get implemented by just replacing nuclear energy instead of the fossil-based or coal-running power plant. So this is in the domestic level, but obviously when it comes to a transition, as the transition says, we expect that it will have also some perspectives globally. And this is something that makes it, my presentation, connected probably more to the next discussion. So in this sense, we know that currently we have the global energy system in which those producers, those resource owners located in Russia and MENA region, they provide raw material, oil, gas, and meat products. And they apply, obviously, the technology and investment, also in some cases project service to produce oil and gas. And obviously, there is also the chain between China and, let's call it, the West. For years and years, this has been the system. Even though after 1970s oil crisis, even though recently United States and of course a newcomer called Australia has been added as the fossil providers, but this has been the system. But obviously, we have also another actors in both sides, the demand and the supply side. So we have OPEC, GCF, we have IEA, we have IRENA. But is that all? Of course not, because we have also non-state actors, those who are surfing around and their activities have some security repercussions. So what will happen to this situation, basically, because it's important to know that because of some other non-state actors who try to push the system currently, the system is changing internationally. So, for instance, when it comes to the new energy system and the energy transition, we more and more hear about the decarbonized, decentralized, and digitalized energy system in the European Union. But that is not all, obviously, because basically, for example, in China, we know that China is producing more and more rare earth material, and it has become the first producer in the world. So the point is that the system is changing, because there is also another newcomer, because most of this material come from African continent. So as a result, I don't want to be in the pitfall of technology determinism and those leftist ideas. But anyway, the question is that either there is any security repercussion for that huge change in the global level. So when it comes to security implication, we obviously can see that there are three different narrations. Some believe that the whole change will be positive because it will reduce our dependence to Russia. It will help us to tackle the mitigation of climate change. Some believe that it's all in all negative because we will fall into another sort of dependence from the fossil dependence to Russia to dependence to China. And then, obviously, they believe that there is the potential conflict and contradiction between food and energy security, in particular considering the biomass. And if we are going to be more digitalized, cybersecurity threat. And at the end of the day, there is the threat that we will have a pollution shift in energy production because of all the mess around producing the raw earth material. Nevertheless, some believe that we should be a bit more cautious, and they are agnostic because they believe that it's too soon to talk about depoliticization of energy. Also, they believe that the probable instability, the political instability in the petrostate, either Russia or Middle Eastern states, it will spill over to the Europe and it will have repercussions. And then a big question is that what would happen to OPEC and other international organizations? Will it be a kind of change like in the mission, like what we had already in NATO after dissolution of Soviet, or OPEC will disappear at the end? These are the important discussions. And then the new non-state actor who may even emerge because of the new resource curse, in particular in African continent. So all in all, it is that we are facing high uncertainty. But when it comes to the energy security by itself, after the whole security system, it seems that the things are clearer because recalling your thoughts from Security 101, the definition of energy security if we assume that it's providing available, accessible, acceptable, and affordable energy, so it seems that we are experiencing a paradigm shift here, because at the end, the availability, which was supposed to meet the concerns about finite essence of fossil fuels, will turn to the demand for conquering an intermittency issue of the renewables. And when it comes to accessibility, the main geopolitical concern, the story would be different, because we will aim to have access to geographically bound renewables. And instead of thinking about carbon offsetting, it seems that we need to think more about carbon neutrality. And finally, about the affordability, we will have to make a choice between importing and basically producing our own energy sources. But all in all, energy transition to a decarbonized energy system goes to the acceptability, yet we need to be guaranteed for having a secure energy system, to provide the secure energy to the final consumers. This is the main backbone of the question. So for this mean, in particular for the European Union, and then when it comes to Estonia, we tried to contribute to giving policy advices for more secure transition towards a decarbonized system. This includes, obviously, to the three main basically infrastructures, including the heating and cooling systems, natural gas, and electricity. So basically, I don't know if it is possible that somebody can click on this heating and cooling system for me. Yes, thank you. So basically here, we know that as a heritage of the Soviet system in particular, we have here the central cooling, heating and cooling system. So we tried to make modeling in order to define what can be the best solution for achieving to a decarbonized heating and cooling system in 2050. And these were the graphs showing the results, not making you confused on this, just to give you a bit of the final policy prescriptions here. So we did scenario modeling, formed 4 different scenarios, and then out of that, it was revealed based the system, the current system, which is based on the biomass. It has its own pros, which is obviously that we are using some endogenous energy sources, but at the end of the day, we cannot survive based on that until 2050 because of sustainability consideration. So we need the electrification, and electrification, of course, we can be technology neutral, but at the same time, we can talk more and more about the heat pumps. So at the same time, what is more important that in any scenario, we need to focus on renovation, on energy efficiency, improvement in the buildings. And then we can talk about the electrification as the best scenario, providing best options for us. Then we can also talk about the electricity, because when it comes to the heating and cooling system and deploying the heat pumps, we need electricity. And electricity cannot be based on the shale. It needs to be based on the renewables. And this is actually why we were involved in another study of electricity system for having a decarbonized electricity system, and in which basically these are the policy prescriptions. So basically different scenarios. Actually, there were 9 different scenarios were modeled, and at the end of the day, it became revealed that among different scenarios, we can focus on the combination of renewable energy sources and having storage capacity, and this storage can be batteries or even the pump storage. We need 9 to 14 billion euros of investment for this. And it's interesting that at that point we predicted that we need 90 to 140 euros for the electricity price, and right now we have already passed this. So it seems that in this sense we have one of the conditions, and obviously there were some basically policy prescriptions to involve more and more energy communities. So back to the idea of energy democracy, we need people to be more involved. We need the society to be more involved, and obviously this is the thing that we need as a strategy for energy transition. When I was listening to the previous presentations, I tried to think that how much things can be connected to each other in this pathway to transit to a carbon neutral system. It was interesting that everybody believes that the time has passed. So if it is not late, but the time for making decision has been done. On the other sense, we need the wise politicians, and especially because we are in the era full of floods, climate change, war, negligent to the international norms, and so many other bad things. That reminded me the story of Pandora's box. So recalling your thoughts from theology, Zeus created Pandora and sent her there to the earth and gave her a box and said, never ever open the box. One day curiosity got the better of Pandora and she did open the box. All flew peg, sorrow, and all sort of devil things came out of the box. The only thing good in the corner of the box was hope. So in one sense, I feel more lucky than Pandora because we have hope. We hopefully have wisdom to make decision, scientific decision, and make a bridge between these scientific decisions to the policy implications. Thank you very much.
Javad, thank you very much. You've set the scene beautifully for our second panel, and again, what an amazing panel I have for you. And we're going to be looking at the question of how the dynamics of geopolitics are interlinked with human security and global environmental change. And I'd like to invite the panel to come on stage. Madis Kallas, who is chairman of the board of Alexla, Isabella Lövin, who is the chair of SEI's board, and also former Minister for Climate and the Environment, and also another former Deputy Prime Minister, not just one, but two former Deputy Prime Ministers today. We'd like to invite Ando Leppiman to join us as well. He is the chairman of the board of the Estonian Stockpiling Agency, and also Rainer Sachs, who is member of management board of Cyberxa. And I think he's just getting his mic on. Brilliant. Thank you, Rainer. Fantastic. As you can see, we've changed our chairs. This should be a little bit more comfortable for you guys. The perching was, yeah, it was tricky. Wonderful. Okay. Great. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I'm actually going to start with Isabella, if I may.
All right.
So Isabella, this year, after 10 years at the top of politics, you published a book called Oceankänslan in Swedish. Oceanic Feeling is the English translation. And it's much more than just a political memoir. It's a real reflection on the role of politics and the state of the world today and our relationship with it and our responsibility for the blue planet. I just wonder whether thinking about this question around geopolitics and how that's interlinked with questions around environmental change and human security, from your extended experience at the top of politics, what do you see as being those points of interconnection? Perhaps you could reflect on that.
I mean, one of the kind of questions that comes back to me all the time and has done over a long period of time from journalists, from children, from students, and from myself even, is like, why, when we have all this knowledge of what is going to happen, why are we not acting on it? Why can't we just, get along, have agreements, and just do it? And that's a very, simple, basic question. And just to have a short joke, I mean, Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the European Commission, he once said, well, everyone knows what to do, but no one knows how to get re-elected once you've done it. And I mean, that's part of the answer, actually. And I think we all see it around the world with populist movements growing and fake news, alternative facts and everything spreading. And so next question is why is that happening? And you've been discussing this already in the previous panel on the individual responsibility. Do people don't want to change? Well, once you do the policy change, like when you prohibit smoking in restaurants and public spaces, then everyone kind of first are alarmed and, well, this will, every restaurant will go bankrupt, and then all of a sudden everyone likes it. So you have this kind of resistance towards change. But, you also have a lot of economic interests driving and pushing for this resistance and this fear, in fact, of change to grow. And in my book, it's not in English, but it will come out in English. You can read it in Swedish. But in my book, I also actually dedicate more than one chapter on kind of digging into what are the economic interests behind this resistance. And I found to my own, actually, to be honest, my own surprise. I've been the Minister of Climate for 5 years in Sweden. I never got the time to actually read all the stories, documentaries on climate skepticism and how that has been financed by think tanks. Just after, in my introduction, I mentioned the formation of UNFCCC. At the same time, there were billions and billions and billions of dollars going into think tanks, producing policy briefs, financing so-called scientists. Maybe they were scientists, but not on climate. Going out and saying that there's great doubts about climate science. One of them they were attacking Al Gore. And then you had the media starting to report on the climate science, which was kind of totally, there was no debate. There was consensus from the very beginning. 1957 was the first year that the Exxon, the oil company Exxon published their own reports on the effects of CO2 emissions. But then, this campaign led to media starting to report on climate change, like there's two sides to this. There's uncertainties, and bang, then you started to have all these kind of debates with the uncertainty and also kind of fueling the sense that this would threaten ordinary people's lives. And I could talk about this forever, but I mean, I was quite shocked when I found out that this has been going on. It's been a very, very targeted operation with the coalition of the major fossil fuel companies in the world, but mostly those in the US. But obviously, if you want to link this also to geopolitics, you can see the ties between those companies and dictatorships in the Middle East with, I mean, the fossil interests in Russia and Saudi Arabia are not exactly the interests that promote democracy, and they are not interested in us, you know, speeding up a transition and getting out of the dependency of fossil fuels. Like, as a climate minister, I've seen, and I think people are not aware of this, but I've seen it so many times in climate negotiations. These countries are, you know, doing everything to sabotage the negotiations. That's the truth, you know. And if we would really come to agree on we're going to make, I mean, we could have done this already in 1995 or something like that. But the technology is there, but the narrative is that it's going to cost us so much, and ordinary people are going to suffer so much. But the truth is that the ordinary people is going to suffer enormously, and already are, out of climate change and the climate crisis. And the technology is already there. We have electric mobility and cars and all that. We just need brave politicians, and we already heard from the previous speaker that, you know, wise policies is going to make it happen. It's not impossible to do the transition. It's only about, you know, addressing enough means and resources towards doing it. And it's already costing us a lot in the other end for not doing it. You know, look at all the floods and droughts and everything happening in Europe. So, I mean, it's going to cost us not to act. So we have to address enough resources to act, have the right policies in place, like a prohibition on smoking. I mean, we can do this, and we can really facilitate and speed up the transition, and that's my conviction. So my book is not only, you know, showing about the inevitable that is inevitable that we are going to get into a much worse climate crisis. No, I'm really wanting to emphasize the possibilities. That, you know, the hope that you were talking about inside the Pandora's box, because we have the power, we have the tools actually to do it. And I totally agree that we also need to, you know, talk about what the world that we want to come to. I mean, Martin Luther King didn't say, you know, I have a problem. He said, I have a dream. So, and we need to kind of project that dream and that possibility and that hope, that positivism. And I think absolutely we can do it.
Thank you, Isabella. I'm going to just, I don't want to deflate the dream part of the message that you've got there, but just coming back a little bit to the vested interests, and I wanted to turn to Rainer, actually. Rainer, you're working at a cybersecurity company at the moment, but you have an illustrious recent past working in foreign policy, foreign intelligence, and the like. And we've really understood that there is a connection here between the vested interests and between the energy war that we now see being waged on Europe. And I want to ask you, how do we withstand this energy war? How do we do it in the short term? How do we do it in the long term, such that we are thinking about sustainability and resilience?
That's a perfect question, but there is no any perfect answer, unfortunately. Because it's, here we can see one minister has been acting for 5 years in the cabinet in a country which feels very responsible for renewable energy and sustainable development and all this kind of hashtags we're listing here permanently during these discussions. But I wouldn't say that nothing has been achieved. The question is not that what is the right thing to do or how to achieve something. Because, okay, now I'm getting a little bit demagogic, but you can achieve a right thing even not doing a right thing by the idea. But point is that the energy is not the only issue in the geopolitics. Energy is one of the very, very important topics in the geopolitics, but it's not the only topic. It's not about energy, what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. It's not about just energy, what's happening between Taiwan and China's People's Republic at the moment. And we can't separate these issues, just simply like that. And I think that the biggest challenge for let's call it Western countries, because it's not a good term to describe the whole situation, but it's more comfortable. We used to talk in this way. But the biggest challenge for Western countries is that how to cooperate with the countries which are actually a challenge for you. I will not make any list here because it's not important maybe, but how do you set up your policies if you have a value conflict between the countries, but in the same time you can't just build up a confrontation with these countries. You need to, if you like to achieve something, you have to somehow to coexist with them at least. Some kind of a cooperation is needed. And how to achieve mutual understanding, to do at least one small step, not just have like permanent discussions, let's say, if the discussions can grow on very, very quick speed to the just, let's say, Cold War, and nothing is happening. That's it. How to find this kind of balance that you can defend your values and you can achieve something at least which is needed, and you can achieve just only in a cooperation. And here is something that nobody knows a good answer. There isn't any good recipe. Sometimes you get something in a confrontation. Sometimes it's not working out at all. So I think that what we can see in Europe is now it's a discussion is about that about very, very bad strategy created in 1990s. Then the assessment about the whole situation was different. I can understand these people because it was looking like going in very normal direction, but it didn't work out. Now, after 30 years or maybe 20 years later, we can maybe say something that, oh, it didn't work out because. But can we see what's happening in different countries and we can predict something certainly happening in the future, so we can build up a strategies for 50 years, for instance. Is it possible? Doing something in a field of environment is very, very important, but human rights are important as well. Now, how we can put these together and go forward with both topics, not making any compromises. Can we achieve something in that case? It's my question. And it's very hard to say that, oh, we can do whatever we like if we start doing. But if we're talking about the geopolitics, I think there is one thing we can say that this is a reality. We should do a reality check permanently. What is realistic and what is not at a certain moment. But strategy is good strategy if we have a task. But we like to achieve that goal. Like European Union has tasked to be a carbon neutral in 2050. So it's very good task. But do we have these 25 steps to achieve that point? I think it's impossible to make complete path. But you should create a lot of different tactics which you can, and you should be flexible at the same time. You should drop one tactic, it's not working out, and find another. And I think here is something which is which we can face, which is a challenge for real democratic systems, is that elections are creating a reality. It's a reality check. It's taking place after every 4 years. So at least you have a chance to check your reality and reliability of your strategy. Does your Or are your citizens still supporting this? But there are different political systems globally which are not following the same. And how you can find this cooperation with that kind of a societies or political systems, this is completely different. How you can explain for your citizens that we are doing now something a little bit different, but we are not changing our big goal. And my next question is that if we re-elect new politicians after 4 years, are they copy or paste on yourself that we are following the same that he was talking, and should we do it? And so there are a lot of challenges, but I think that what I really like to say is that geopolitical challenges can be different in different time. But security remains always in the first place. Whatever you're doing and whatever you like to achieve. And if your citizens are feeling that they are not in safe, they will never follow you. This is one of the basic things in which it's really is like matters in politics.
Thank you much, Rainer. I want to pick up the link, actually, something you said at the start and at the end there. First of all, you said it's not just about energy. There are other things in the geopolitical landscape that are really important to bear in mind. And then also to what you say there at the end. And I want to come now on to Ando. Now, Ando, you're the chairman of the board of the Estonian Stockpiling Agency. And feel free to correct me, but this covers energy to a certain extent, fuel, but also food, which we have heard about a little bit earlier on today. And I'm just wondering how you're weighing up geopolitical turbulence, the fact that geopolitics changes, and environmental change, which we see droughts have an effect on crops as well. In the decisions you're making about what and how much and when to release any of the stockpiles, how's geopolitics affecting the job you do, basically?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question. And for me, actually, kind of geopolitical turbulences, they are kind of known unknowns in a way. And this is the business, actually, what we do now. I mean, fuel stocks basically are established by International Energy Agency collective actions from the 70s already, or I mean the importing countries basically had this measure to counteract on security of supply disruptions, and basically that's why I'm saying that kind of like short-term geopolitical turbulences are known unknowns in a way that I mean we do form the stocks. Either it's fuel, food, medical issues or something like this, and they are meant for short-term kind of delivery problems in a way. When we are talking about the climate change and its effects to stocks or how we are acting in a stockpiling agency. Also, I would put to the same league also those, let's say, global changes to I kind of form the superpower in kind of China type of democracy. So in there, I think we don't know yet how to act actually when forming stocks, because there are more question marks rather than answers at the moment. Of course, it creates quite a lot of price volatility. So basically, the stocks could be also kind of stabilization to prices. I mean, to affordability, either on energy, food, whatever. The other part is also that we are quite heavily dependent on those countries at the moment. I mean, this previous presentation was excellent in that terms, that earth materials, either some kind of springs to some production in, for example, here in Estonia, could affect heavily our exports, for example. So I think there have to be some kind of like change in how we are kind of look for having the stocks or having the kind of measures for continuity of production or some services, for example. So I don't know the answer yet, but I think Estonian system is a way quite wise in there. We have those vital service providers. Basically, their ability have to be in the level that they have to continue their, I don't know, service, production, whatever, even if some other turbulences occur in somewhere in the kind of either electricity or telecommunication or even some providing some, I don't know, some goods, I mean, for your production. So it might be one of the issues to solve this problem. When it comes to energy security, then yeah, I'm actually energy person in my background, so I think there have been quite a change, also mental change in my head, because I was quite keen on the kind of, let's say, that market is the one to solve all the problems. What we are seeing at today's world is actually that we are becoming more and more nationalistic. We are becoming more and more closed, I think, due to the kind of geopolitical change as well. And definitely this could be also the, I mean, one solution for tackling the climate change, that if states have to take more kind of energy security or food security, whatever, to their as their task, they also can, let's say, steer the process towards more climate friendly or something like this. So those could be also the kind of benefits of this process.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And we're going to come back, I think, to this question around markets or the private, the public, nationalistic, populistic ways of approaches. But if we do that, I'm going to bring in Matti to our discussion. You're running an energy company. It's not just an energy company. You do energy, metals, property as well. And I'm actually going to ask a similar sort of question I asked to Andrew, particularly thinking about the energy part side of your business. But how is the current situation in geopolitics affecting the sorts of business decisions that you're taking?
Yeah, thank you of having me here first place, but I think it's easier to start listing what the geopolitics doesn't influence in business, because these days in every kind of strategic decision, investment decision companies are making, the feasibility, the foresight is paramount. If you don't see where you're going in terms of the let's say, normal lifespan of the investment, then it is very common that businesses will not make the investment decisions. And when we are talking about climate change, transition, that is huge in terms of investments. We saw the presentation that only in Estonia, to achieve our renewable goals, it's 9 to 11 billion. And I think all those signals, what comes to what should market solve or what should public sector solve, as long as there is no clear visibility, nobody should expect that this 9 billion will be invested by private sector. It won't happen because the money waits until there is a visibility. And therefore, we are living in a very strange times. I would say that if you look, let's say, a little bit broader than in Estonia, if in Germany energy companies are being subsidized by tens of billions of euros as we speak, and at the same time there is a motion of introducing new taxes to take away profits of similar companies. Of course, not those companies who are taxpayer funded now, but those who managed to build their business the way that they didn't need the taxpayers' money. Now they will be punished for being sustainable in terms of business continuity. So these kind of mixed messages, this turbulence, actually is very bad of getting the relevant investments in place. And if putting it in an Estonian context and maybe, let's say, creating a little bit of this sense of urgency is that I think it was 2 weeks ago or already maybe 3 weeks when Estonian government announced that they have increased their ambition in terms of renewable energy. So 2030, 100% of electricity we consume in volume should be renewably produced in Estonia, and that makes the overall energy consumption, I think, around 65% renewable. That requires maybe not 9 billion in these 8 years, but 5-6 billion worth of investments in Estonia in energy sector in this decade. And in order that those renewable energy projects would be online 2030 for the goal, the final investment decisions have to be made. The financial close has to happen latest 2024, otherwise not doable. In order to have those in place 2024, I mean, the government should understand, and the state, they have never put themselves more sort of higher hurdles to jump than this one, because basically all that has stopped renewable investments in Estonia past 10 years, that has to be solved in 6 to 12 months. Otherwise, 2030 is not doable. And what I wanted to say with that is that I don't think there is really a problem of businesses or entrepreneurs to understand that the only sustainable way for their companies to survive is to make the change happen. The energy companies, especially energy transition. But the misconception generally is that, okay, there are those companies, either those the taxpayers is funding now in Europe or those that we take the profits away. If they do their job, the transition, the green transition happens. And it couldn't be more wrong, because if the transition to take place, like the picture was shown there, there is nothing similar what we know of that system today. Everything changes. I don't know, starting with prosumers. Everybody who can should become a prosumer. To become a prosumer, the first question is the grid, the electricity grid, the power grid ready for that? I mean, in Estonia, we all know that, no, it's not ready. Will it be ready by 2030? If we continue the way we have been handling this past 10 years, the answer is no, it will not be ready. Doing the same things over and over again, what we did till now, this won't get us to where we want to be. So I don't think there is a conflict of the dream, you rightly put, where we want to be. We know exactly, we are so good in looking in back mirror, but you cannot drive rally just looking the back mirror and have been blindfolded. So we know how to analyze the history, but how to build the bridge between where we are today and where we want to be. This is the question.
And I'd like to bring Isabella in, if I may, at this point, because I'm getting the sense that building that bridge requires building that bridge in uncertainty, where we have geopolitics, a known unknown, an uncertain environment, requires politicians perhaps to help set the path, to set goals. And I know, Isabella, that's something that you worked on a lot, about the way in which policy and private enterprise, if you like, can stimulate each other to achieve these sorts of, and to build perhaps an element of more certainty in such an uncertain world. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I think the climate framework that we adopted in Sweden in 2016 has been enormously important for the private sector and also for the energy production sector and everything, to know where we're heading. We're heading towards net zero emissions by 2045. We had a broad support for that in the Swedish parliament from left to right, except for the Sweden Democrats that are now, after the election, being an important voice in the formation of a new government. So we'll see where that takes us. But the important thing is that once we had that in place, with some financial support, a co-financing instrument called the Industry Leap, where we co-finance the heavy sectors in industry, the hard-to-abate sectors, for them to develop new technology. This has really unleashed enormous activity in the Swedish private sector and all across the country, where all the hard-to-abate sectors and basically every sector has formed their own roadmaps towards net zero emissions by 2045. From the political side, we said, okay, so what hindrances do you see? What do you need from us? What types of regulation? What types of economic support? What types of cooperation between the public sector and the private sector, and also between different sectors of the industry? So, like the mining industry and the steel production industry, how can they cooperate with the energy sector? So this has created enormous activity, as I said. And Sweden is now the first country in the world that actually produces already steel, which is produced with green energy and without any CO2 emissions. So with hydrogen, green hydrogen instead of coal. And this is, and I was a minister at the time, and I spoke to these sectors many, many times, and I know for sure that, without that legislation in place, this would not have happened. And you were talking about the market, because still I can read in the pink papers, like the business papers in Sweden, that but the fossil-free steel, that's the proof that the market can solve this problem. Hey, no, it's not by coincidence that this happened in Sweden. Now, and there's other examples like electric cars. We introduced a heavy subsidy. I don't know, some of you might not like subsidies, but heavy subsidies, the bonus-malus reform, where we raised the levy and the tax on heavy polluting vehicles, like SUVs and others. And from the income from that goes to a subsidy for zero-emitting cars. And now Sweden is the #1 country in the EU when it comes to new sales for electric cars and zero-emission cars. Norway is better, but they're not in the EU. Okay, but this has not happened in Finland yet. Maybe it's going to happen. This has not happened in Germany. It's happening in Sweden, and it's because of policy. It's because of and still you can read in the pink papers, which is the business sector, business paper, where they write, but the electric car, that shows that the car industry is going to do, they're solving this by themselves. Yeah, but hey, why haven't they solved it a long time ago? In beginning of the 1990s, there was regulation almost put in place in California, saying that you have to produce zero-emitting cars because of the smog situation. They started to produce them, and then the lobbying machine started, and they kind of managed to withdraw the legislative proposal, and they took back the cars. But the cars were already there. They were there. You can actually see them in a documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car? You can see some Hollywood celebrities driving around with these cars. They love the cars, EV1. No, they took it back and they destroyed it. They didn't put it on the market. Then they convinced George W. Bush to introduce a heavy subsidy for Hummers. And that was the kind of the beginning of the big explosion of Hummers and big SUVs on the market. Now, just one point more. But I think someone said, yeah, but you have to have the reality check with the elections and so on. That's true, absolutely. But with a transition like this, you need to have long-term stability for the business sector. You need to, they need to know that investments now are really worth it. Now there's big, I would say, fear in Sweden with the new government. What's going to happen? Are they going to pull back from the climate law or whatever? So in this context, the EU is completely fundamental. I mean, we need the EU and we need the long-term targets and the climate law and the climate framework and the Green New Deal that the EU has really managed to be quite ambitious with, which if there's, I mean, now we have Joe Biden in the US. I was a minister during Trump, and I saw, the EU is absolutely indispensable in the global discussions and development to drive the green transition forward. Without the EU, we're in real trouble, I would say. So this can be something to hold in your hand when you decide on new investments, that at least we have the EU target for 2050 and all the subsequent targets on different things. And I'm really encouraged to hear from the Commission just this morning, after lunch, but about the kind of the speeding up of the implementation of this. And I think when it comes to energy, that the energy union is good both for climate, but of course also for security for the European Union. And I think that will be really, really something that we must repeat to the citizens so that it's clear. And if I may, just one more, because there was a lot of talk about rare earth metals and perhaps the risk of getting dependent on China or some countries in Africa with kind of doubtable democratic foundations. But again, a Swedish company now, our mining company, LKAB, they've been looking at their how do you say that in English? I haven't talked about this, but all the material, the stones that are already dug up from the mining previously, historic mining. Inside of those big heaps, you can find rare earth materials, minerals that are 5 times the need of Sweden, 30% of the need of the European Union. Only like the waste from the mining historically in Sweden. So we have to, be open-minded, think smart, and not kind of lock ourselves into new situations of dependency that would really threaten our security.
Thank you very much, Isabella. You actually managed to anticipate the next question I was going to ask, was around this material dependency and whether we're seeing some mirroring of decisions similar to the ones taken in the 1990s about energy interdependence, now with material dependence, but some great examples there of how to perhaps go around that, bring in ideas around circularity and also, and I think this recycling of battery technologies and battery materials is going to be critical there. To round us off, I'd like us just to come back to this question of the importance, you raised, the importance of the EU, the importance of collaboration. And one can say that, in response to the war in Ukraine, there's been not uncontested, but a coming together of European countries to collaborate. I just wanted to probe a little bit about the need to remain open in terms of trade. so that we don't fall into a sense of protectionism. We see this in a number of countries where food is not being exported, where energy is being held within its own borders. And I'm just wondering whether you can see a need for us to maintain this openness in terms of collaboration. And what are the threats to that? Rainer?
Of course, there are permanent threats, and you have to work permanently, and this is not that you're solving one issue, and then you can drop it and to go for a next one. It's a process. You should establish a process, a functional one, which really is in your benefit as well. It's not just there should be mutual kind of a benefit all in these processes. You can't just do it in a way like Europe solved the issues in the past, like in 19th century. It's not working anymore. It's not working out. But trade is about the safety of the trade routes. The open trade is just possible in a case the trade routes are safe. So there should be kind of a global approach on these. But I think that the dependency is a little bit different thing, because if there is no free trade and you're going on a bilateral trade agreements, in that case, the dependency is coming not just from the fact that somebody has kind of the raw materials, but what kind of relations you do have with their countries. And this is a very specific assessment you have to make permanently. Countries like Sweden or Estonia are relatively small. Okay, especially Estonia is small. Sweden does have much more global influence than Estonia does. But in some specific spheres, we can be very influential. So for us, there is no any choice like just only the EU as a common foreign policy or security policy really is a choice, but not for every single country inside the EU. This is the only natural option. So this comes first, but we should establish at least normally functioning common security and foreign policy in EU, which is not still existing. We have to be absolutely frank. It's not here. And the second point is that if there is a question about the safety of trade, we have seen that common trade in EU framework is working out quite well. It's a long traditions inside the EU. We all know that, okay, the French farmers have very specific issues. We all know it somehow, even if it's not suitable for our own country, we can manage with that. And we know that in global, it's working out. But in the case of a security policy, it's already a little bit different. And it's not necessarily working out in the same way. And here is quite a big gap we still have. And there is no any good recipe how to overcome it. But just, we know it in Europe, it's talkings. But if we should put down what is a kind of a most important issue in our foreign and security policy. Is it the kind of values or is it something else? This comes first. And there should be a proper assessment behind, because if it's just about values, I would say that in that case we should limit very much our trade, if you compare it, especially on the present situation. And the question remains who can be our strategic partners at all? That's a main issue, actually.
What do you say, Ando? Is the future a sort of values-based club of countries that collaborate and trade with each other?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the good part, actually, what we got from this Russian aggression towards Ukraine, actually, is that we are back to the kind of value-based cooperation. I mean, in the European Union, as well as in the kind of, like Rainer mentioned, these Western countries or powers. So during the COVID times, I think it was quite a shattered in a way. So in that respect, I think it starts from there, and definitely, I mean, if you have a kind of like similar mindset, it could bring you towards additional kind of trade, cooperation, etc., etc. So in that respect, I'm pretty optimistic for the EU kind of collaboration at least. But to add, I think, of course, you couldn't kind of forget. I mean, in this cooperation, also your kind of own security means, and it goes, I mean, beyond just kind of defense policy, and there actually all those energy security, other issues are coming into the picture. So
here is one very good example actually with the trade with the United States. I guess we have 99% of we share the same values between the United States and Europe, but we can't manage to trade.
Yeah, we cannot.
Yeah, we can.
True.
And that's the issue. So it's what's the value-based security and foreign policy? When I'd like to ask it.
Isabella, you talked warmly about the importance of the EU in climate action. I mean, the EU can be, I take it also that the EU can be a maker of geopolitics, not just a taker of geopolitical turbulence. And one way of doing that would be perhaps by using trade and trade agreements to push ahead on sustainability. I mean, what's your view on that?
I think that's what the European Union has tried to do for a long time. And we have the Cotonou Agreement, we have different types of trade agreements where there's human rights clauses, there's also sustainability criteria, and that has been, I think, to some extent successful. I've seen for myself, for instance, with fisheries partnerships agreements, that once we introduced a clause making sure that if the EU is going to import fish from a country, it has to have management procedure and control, monitoring, surveillance in place. Otherwise, we don't know if it's illegally caught, you know. And that has actually helped countries. And then the EU also has helped in instrumental ways and with resources and expertise to build up that control mechanism in other countries. So that's a way of working which to some extent has helped. And we've seen a period where some competing powers, global powers, have tried to come with better agreements. I mean, you can sell your fish to us, we don't control anything. But we could kind of build some things in your country like China has been doing for a long time. And I think you've seen a kind of fatigue about that in Africa with Chinese coming in, building things. All the signs are in Chinese, so you can't even read where's the emergency exit because it's Chinese. And big ministries I've seen in some African countries, and then they bring in their own workers and they leave it there, and the maintenance is impossible for the local population to keep. So there's been a fatigue against that, but it's not easy. I mean, it's all the time. Very much effort to try to influence through business, through trade. But I think there's an enormous responsibility for global companies to take that responsibility in each and every situation from Western-based companies, not to profit from fragile states with weak institutions, with high levels of corruption. It's very easy to come in there. You just put your wallet on the table and bang, you have a nice agreement and with no human rights clauses or whatever. But I think we've come to a point in time and in history where no one is gaining from a total global disorder. and where we're seeing flows of migration due to the corruption and the impossibility of living as a decent person in some countries, and where some Western companies is actually fueling corruption, is actually looking the other way on dictatorships and just kind of taking the big advantages on that. And this is a huge problem. I think the Agenda 2030 we haven't mentioned here, but that's also the dream, you know, and it's been already negotiated. It's already on paper. In 2015, all the world's countries signed up to Agenda 2030. So, you know, in 8 years' time, we're going to have a completely sustainable world with no wars, no climate change, absolutely healthy oceans, biodiversity, gender equality, education for all the children, clean water, clean air. Yeah, but we all laugh at this, but, you know, where else do we want to be? What's the option? And I think the beauty of Agenda 2030 is that it interconnects all these things, saying exactly what we're saying here, building resilience through sustainability. You're not going to build, you know, resilience first and sustainability later, but it's only through sustainability, social, economic, and environmental sustainability, that you actually will have peace on Earth and a healthy environment and possibilities for all people to develop themselves and live free lives. But there's a lot of hindrances in this. So I think this discussion here is so relevant, because if every country would just live up to Agenda 2030 that they're already signed up to, no problem. But there are so many power struggles, there are so many hidden agendas, there are so many kind of cynic worldviews that are hindering us from this. And that's why I called my book The Oceanic Feeling, because the oceanic feeling is, I think, a description of being a small part of something much bigger. And that we all are part of something much bigger, which is the global community and also the natural ecosystems that forms this earth. And that is a positive kind of driver for us. And I think it's to respect and kind of, to respect that feeling and to accept that feeling is also a way to find it worthwhile to fight for this world.
Thank you very much, Isabella. Thank you very much to our panel. We've run out of time. Sometimes when I think of oceans, I think about being all at sea in English, a sense of being lost, and especially in a context of turbulent geopolitics, that's perhaps something that you can easily fall into. But the idea of an oceanic feeling of being connected to each other and to the world is one that we definitely need in order to overcome all of these challenges that we face. Thank you very much to the panel, and applause to them, please. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for your patience. We ran over a little bit with such a fascinating conversation here today. We will have an opportunity to visit the exhibition here at Fotografiska. There are 2 guides available for you who I think can wave to you at the back of the hall here.
I can just maybe say in the mic, it's maybe easier. Hi, everyone. A warm greeting from our side as well. My name is Elo, and this is Esther. We're both the guides in this house, and we'll be very happy to take you on a tour. I will be guiding the English tour, and my colleague will be guiding the Estonian tour. But I think the division is not quite equal, so if we'll try to do 2 groups around the same amount of people, that would be lovely. So I'll gather the people with English and maybe a few additional Estonians here, and Esther can gather everyone else over there. Thank you.